In 1995, I started being invited to go to schools in other parts of the world. I remember sitting at my drafting table doing a book in the day of faxes, and a fax came through the machine from Ethiopia inviting me to come and speak. And that was in 1995. And I immediately turned around because at that time I didn't have my own space. And my husband was an architect. He's an architect working at home at his drafting table. And I said, didn't they airlift all the Jews out of there? What are they trying to pull and inviting me to come? And I looked it up on the State Department because I had heard whatever rumblings of things. And they said, don't go. But there was a problem. They got involved with a school in Egypt, in Cairo. And being a fine arts major in college, the idea that I would go and see the pyramids, I couldn't resist. And it was a crazy thing to do because I had young children. That we would go and do that together and leave them was a little strange looking back. They survived. And that changed my life. I remember the first time when we were in Cairo, we heard at 4 in the morning the call to prayer and woke up and thought, we were near the Israeli embassy, so I thought actually there was an attack. And in fact, in Ethiopia, they were supposed to have dancing and festival for me, and they had many festivals for me, but they never had the dancing in a restaurant because the restaurant had been blown up. And I realize now, looking back too, we were brought in and we stayed in a home by the State Department and were brought in by the CIA and left with the CIA. So the United States wasn't aware at the public of that time of what was starting to go on in the other parts of the world. So it changed my world just very early on, seeing other people and the way they lived. But I realized something that I never thought about. I think in a certain way it proceeded because I said to myself, why am I interested in that? Why do I always put in my Jewish books about other practices, other religions? If it's a Tu B'Shvat book, from Pearl Plants a Tree, I wanted tree planting festivals. In the wedding book, it was different religions, which was also in the 90s with Beni's first wedding. Why did I do all that? And I realized when I was 13 years old, I was interested in art my whole life, from when I was 5 years old. And I started going to the High School of Music and Art. And here's this white Jewish middle-class girl from Queens who was traveling 3 hours a day in the 60s into Harlem. And it was not changed. There was no such thing as gentrification. I had dreams about it. It was scary in terms of a lot of the buildings were derelict. They were empty. There was a lot of drugs. So I think that opened my world from being on this block in Queens to this bigger world. Plus, in music and art, I met children, other students from all over the city, from every single borough. So I met a lot of different kinds of people who became my friends from different kinds of homes and different level, people who don't have money, people who had money, all sorts of different people. So I think that was one thing too. And I always felt for other people, just feeling sensitive to other people, to their needs, to their feelings, picking up what their emotions are. I'm very interested in people who are different and learning about differences, because in a way, what we all want basically in the end is to be loved and to give love and to be kind. It's wrapped around things, other textiles and tiles and different, everything. Everything interests me. I think it was more in 95 because then I started doing more trips. I went to Morocco. I was invited to all of Eastern Europe, other countries, which was an incredible trip for me because particularly going to Poland, where my mother was born and left there, and my husband's mother, and that was very emotional. I'm going to get emotional thinking about it because I knew if they didn't leave, my children wouldn't exist. And I remember telling the kids that, and because these were a lot of children in that school, most of them were Christian, but their grandparents had been Jewish and great-grandparents. It was one of those moments. My husband never comes to my speeches, rarely, and he was in the back of the room, and we were both, because his mother was born in Lodz and mine was born in Bialis, two major ghettos. Growing up in a home like that gives you a certain predisposition to things. I really don't know, but I really felt those. I'll tell you what a lightning bolt, though, was. Um, I work very hard when I go to these schools and speak. And I took a break after one of the schools, and I was on a rooftop and I was alone in a chair because and why I was alone was the gift the school gave was to my husband. My payment was they sent him around on a small plane with a guide from the school to look for the lost ark all over Ethiopia. So I was alone, and which I loved being, and it was the afternoon call to prayer, and the sun was shining, and it was here. I'm a Jewish woman, and it moved me. It was beautiful. It was lyrical. It was the same kind of feeling that you get at Kol Nidra when the cantor is chanting. I don't know. It spoke to me. When I go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Islamic wing, and you see all the beautiful tiles from Isfahan and other parts of, they consider themselves Persian, not Arab, but other parts of the Arab world and the Islamic wing. And then you see it in these countries. And I was never aware at the time, as most Americans, I think we live in a somewhat insular kind of way. Well, that was what the children asked me in the school. And what happened then was 9/11. And when 9/11 happened, everything that I had seen, I even used some of the material, like there's a mosque, a big mosque that I spent a few hours in Cairo. And I used that in a book that I did for 3-piece books after 9/11. And that's where I used my different travels in that book. The first one was Let There Be Light. Unfortunately, it's out of print, but there were 14 editions of that. But I was curious if the concept of Tikkun Olam and restoring the world was in many different cultures and in many different religions. And that's when I started even getting more into it and reading it. I read the Quran, I read the Christian Bible, I read the Torah, I read, and then all sorts of other religions. So I read the Tao, I read Buddhism, just everything that American indigenous people. And so I took different quotes from different parts to put them together on repairing the world. And then I did art for that. And then after that, I did a book called Paths to Peace, where I picked 18 people around the world, what they did in terms of peace, but I wanted different ethnicities. And then I did a book, Light. So I did a trilogy of 3-piece books. And Light was a more picture book, so when Sidney Taylor, because I told the story of putting the pieces of the vessel back together. But I used all that background of my world opening up to a bigger world in those books. I don't like to do a book because it's in or the topic is in. If it applies to who you are, you should do it. And there are some things that come across my way that I feel, oh, that would interest me, but I don't know if I'm the one to do it. Lucille Clifton was a Black poet, and this was in the early, it was 1970s, from an editor to illustrate one of her books. At the time, I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I was the right artist for her work. I think you have to stay true to who you are and what you want and what you believe. I don't think you should do something because it's popular or a fad. You can go with that, or you can do what you want to do, and hopefully somebody comes around and takes an interest in publishing it. No, I haven't. When I wrote the novel Earth to Andrew Blackman, which was about a little boy getting bar mitzvahed, and he gets lessons from an 83-year-old man who does his bar mitzvah, his second bar mitzvah at 83. his best friends in the book are Korean, and my son's best friend at the time, and I drew the families, and he was taking music lessons from the mom, were Korean. I knew the family, I knew what they ate. Listen, my husband was eating kimchi both times I was pregnant. I love to cook, I'm interested in everything. So the answer for that is, I think if someone wants to do something that they're not familiar with, they can do research, historical research. They can do a nonfiction book, and that I always put research and put stuff in the back of my fiction, which sometimes confuses people because I think they don't know where to shelf it. I just do what comes out of my life. I did work for 3.5 years on Benny's Tiny Tales during the pandemic, and it was very consuming. It was very challenging in terms of the time, the emotion, and the dedication. It was just a passion project, a work of love for me. So there are many books I can think of, moments in my life. All right, so this is what happened. After the 80th pizza that you've made yourself during the pandemic, and the 200th scone my husband made, which I should not complain about, except thank God I finally lost my freshman 10. My husband says to me, "Whatever happened to Benny?" I said, "Benny? Benny's in his 30s. Off in the world, he's doing his thing." So, but it got me thinking, and I said, there may be something in Benny having all the cousins, everybody having a families. And because she says, "Oh, that's a really terrific idea." She said, "Go and write, just start writing and start illustrating." But I work where I have to write first. The manuscript has to be strong. It has to stand on its own, and I might rewrite a zillion times. And I want it strong enough that anybody could illustrate it, not me. And then if I decide I want to illustrate it, but of course I was going to do it with this. And then I sent her the stories, and she said, "Do a pagination of the book and start doing some sketches for it." And I'm not such a sketchy person. I don't want to feel like I'm doing the book a whole bunch of times. I want the emotion and the painting once. But she didn't want that. So what happened is I started doing the pagination, and what I wanted the structure to be, where was the history of every single, I picked 10 of the major holidays. She said she wants it to be like a go-to Bible that everyone goes to and pulls out who's Jewish, how to, what the holiday's about, tell a story. And then I added in recipes that was wonderful, that Ruth Reichel and Molly Katzen gave amazing quotes in the back, and who are James Beard People Award winners, and that was really great for me. And then, so I started testing the recipes, doing the recipes, did songs, prayers, making up crafts, making up recipes. So it was a lot of work, and it was fabulous. And then the icing on the cake was to do the art. And she wanted, because it was the pandemic, I couldn't go in and say, "Oh, here are little samples." And I did send her some things through email, but it's not the same. So we met with masks, and I did do sketches on my opaline parchment. I penciled it in, and it was very liberating for me to do that. And we met in Grand Central Station in a restaurant that was, everything was freezing. Everything was open and outside, and laid it out after we had breakfast very early and cleaned off. When she excused herself a moment, I had the way to clean off the table, dry it off, everything, and started spreading out art in the restaurant. So that's how we did that. And then she said, "Go home and finish the rest of the book." And that's what I did. So that took a couple of years. It was a real blessing to do something like that. But what I want to add is, it's not implicit in the stories. There was a cookbook I did for Beni in 1998, I think, or something like that. I did another family tree, made it up because it was now double. And I realized, as in my life and my friend and everything, that their cousin Max was now, I didn't have it in the stories, but you see it visually in the art, and you see it also in the family tree there. So Max is gay, and I think Rosie's divorced, or she's single, and one of them is divorced. One of them is not Jewish. Luna, in my head, was Italian. My close friend was actually having a baby, and her baby's name is Luna, which happened afterward. I think she took that name, actually, now that I'm thinking of it. But she was Italian, so I just felt I wanted the stories to reflect now. And then the other thing was, for instance, in the Tu B'Shvat, like I did when I did Pearl years ago, and I had different tree planting festivals around the world. In this one, Milo's Maple Mystery, your brain connects things, and it's a mystery. They're out in the woods. My husband used to do maple tapping. He did it with Boy Scout troops and on right here where I live, and we have very 200-year-old trees. I'd rather go and buy maple syrup at a store. But when the kids were growing up, we did a lot of that. So that's part of it. And then so I included indigenous people, where the father, Beni, is telling about the indigenous people and maple candy and the sap and the whole thing. So I incorporated that because that was a big part of the indigenous people worshiping in various tribes' trees. And so it connected for me. And I like the connections of different faiths and different peoples coming together that have similar, maybe, wants and desires in certain ways, in a very basic, fundamental way. It never even, no, it wasn't a question. Um, that book grew out of A Moon for Mo and Mo, because while I was doing A Moon for Mo and Mo, which is about two boys who meet in Sahadi's, which is a real Brooklyn supermarket, what I want to add about why I wrote that book, because there is a flow to it. For every Jewish holiday, I would go to Brooklyn and go to all the stores that are really not Jewish for spices, to make my hummus and to really make good stuff. And Sahadi's is known as one of the best in the world, if not the United States. So I went there, and while I was in line getting all my stuff for Rosh Hashanah, there was a woman next to me who was in a black hador, covered totally, and she was with her little girl, and I was with my granddaughter, who was little and very tiny, and they were looking and playful and everything, and I don't know. So that was like what happens in a book. It was just a spark. So I wrote A Moon for Mo and Mo. While I was doing that, toward the end, I said, gee, I wonder if Hanukkah and Christmas ever fall on the same day like Ramadan and Rosh Hashanah does every 30 years. Everything's connected. I also want to add, when I was in Morocco in 98, we were celebrating Passover, but it was also Ramadan at the exact same time then. So, and I remember entering to where we were going to stay with sheep. And I was invited for the Pearl books, and she's a lamb, and there was sheepskins off of balconies, blood dripping everywhere. And my husband's a vegetarian. What I'm saying is it all connected. So from that book, I found, in fact, that book was published in 2018, I think it won the Sidney Taylor. I said, oh, I wonder if those two holidays, and I found out in 2024, Hanukkah and Christmas were going to be on the same day. I said, I can wait 6 years. And then I didn't know Beni was going to happen. I didn't know a pandemic. I didn't know Beni was going to happen. And then I also wrote at that time A Bear for Beni, and I wrote it because of two things. The major thing was, I know I turned it into immigration, and in terms of an Eastern Europe. We never said where the immigrant came from in that. But there were two elements. There was the war in Ukraine. Vivian Nagberg illustrated that. She was Ukrainian. And she was signed up actually before the war. It happened just when she started. That was during the pandemic. So I chose her to illustrate that. And then for Gingerbread, I didn't have time to do that. And I'm not great at drawing people. So I found an illustrator. They showed me a lot of portfolios, a lot of them, who lives in Los Angeles, lives half the year in Vietnam and half the year in LA. And she's an animator, and I liked her work. So I thought she would be good for it. There were some issues a little bit because I think there were things initially she made a lot of the Jewish people look like, I said, they look like they fell off the truck of some shtetl in the middle of nowhere. I said it to her. So now I hope she doesn't see this. But no, they looked like from the very religious Jews. They had payas and I said, I'm Jewish and I wear dungarees and sneakers. And the grandparents don't have to look like that. And that book, so it was a fit. And that book also came out of one of my sons who is very into his Judaism, married a woman who is not Jewish. Her last name is Feather, like the feathers in the book. One of my beloved, their one-child son, does celebrate both. So I wrote it for him. I did read recently, I wasn't aware of it. I was surprised that there's 61% of families are interfaith in the United States. So I know in the synagogue I was in, they did not accept people if you were getting married who were not of the Jewish faith on the bima. A lot of my friends whose children married other people left. So I would like just acceptance, enjoying it. When I suggested that the grandmother may be Black because of the Ethiopian Jews, we were excited about that. So we did change the grandmother. So there were a lot of elements in that book. The illustrator is Asian. She was learning about Hanukkah, even how to put the candles. That's something I can understand. I had to double check that one. We said from year to year, what is it left to right? It was because then you twist it around and you're facing it in the window. I mean, we were going crazy, checking the illustrations that they were all kosher. And so I think it's a very eclectic kind of book. I think it's a very now kind of book. And I'm excited about it. And it was taken by the Junior Literary Guild, and as Mo and Mo was. And in addition, it's in the original art show, which is a show the Society of Illustrators does every winter in Manhattan for a couple of months. It's getting some nice little legs to it. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And I hope people read it and see it. And I hope that Beni, Beni's Tiny Tales that's my baby because I illustrated it. And I work with a brush that's a 000 Series 7. It's the size of a hair. So there's a lot of detail, like a Persian manuscript in it. Or if you see some of the old Torahs from the 1600s, there's a lot of detail in the Megillah and that kind of art. And so that's a really important book to me, and I'm hoping that Jewish families will take it out. I noticed, interestingly, that back to the interfaith, when I've done book signings, there are people who say, I'm going to give this as an engagement gift. The person that they're marrying is not Jewish, and I want them to, from your description of every holiday, learn how to cook and learn what the holiday's about. And then people who don't even have young children but have new babies do it as a baby naming gift because they say, I want the new baby to have something in their library that they can grow with. So I hope that continues. And because put a lot of effort in. And I'm proud of the production that Little Brown did on that book. They really went all out. First of all, I've written a lot of YA novels. I've written a lot of books. I've written a lot of books that are not Jewish. I've done a lot of art for books that are not Jewish. So I come to the world as an artist. I also do very huge paintings, modern art, the size of a wall. So I feel I'm an artist first and a writer first. I love to write, and I write visually. It's like painting a canvas with words. Writing. I love being alone. I love working alone. The pandemic was quiet. People weren't making noise. There were no planes hardly going anywhere. My editor said, yeah, I noticed it's great for you introverted, creative types. And I could just get up every day and just quietly do that. So the world stopped. I even pulled back and stopped because I'm intense. I'm very goal oriented. I'm very focused and I'm very organized. So I could just be and be more in the moment. So that the takeaway is that before anything else, I'm an artist and a writer, and that's how I see my life. And that's what I love to be with. That's what I love to do. Um, I don't ever see, I never want to stop doing it. And an extension of that is I love gardening and really sweating and hauling stuff all over and planting things and painting with nature and things. And I've never been to that part of the world, to France, but what Monet does with his garden, I have lots of rooms in my garden and areas, and I love to do that. I love to cook. The writing, the art, the cooking, the gardening, it puts me in the moment, and I don't have to think of the world because the world's a tough place. I feel. And now it's even more. I can't imagine what it's like for children because we didn't grow up with the internet. And it's a very fast place. And I think I'd like from my books that people take away from that. Sometimes people will say that some of the stories are they're very sweet. Yeah, they're kind and they're empathetic. Sweet can be saccharine. I'm not sweet. I like funny. I love a great sense of humor. I like both sides of the coin. Humorous with where you're crying at the same time. I like depth. That's what I would like people to take away.